Hello, welcome back to the Methodist Perspective. Today I'm going to be talking about why, this is going to be a fun one, why the United Methodist Church is the true American Methodist institution, and why anyone who is desiring to be Methodist should, in every case practicable, be a United Methodist specifically. So, I'm going to start by talking about institutional continuity. The United Methodist Church is, quite simply, the only true and proper heir to the institution that was formed in 1784 called the Methodist Episcopal Church. The original Methodist Church in the United States is the direct ancestor, and not only that, but that the United Methodist Church is the only direct and proper heir of that church. I think that's important. We should not get rid of old things so easily as we like to in this day and age. Let me go through that a little bit. So the Methodist Episcopal Church forms in 1784. Very simple. It runs basically undivided. I think there's a little bit of trouble, of course, in the mid-1800s regarding slavery. There's splits there. But the Methodist Episcopal Church remains, right? Things split off from it. It does not split off from them. So the Methodist Episcopal Church continues until 1939, at which point it splits. Oh wait, no it doesn't. At which point it merges with the Methodist Protestant Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church South to form the Methodist Church. That's 1939. Then in 1968, of course, the modern United Methodist Church forms by a unification, a merger, with the Evangelical United Brethren Church and the Methodist Church. So, the Methodist Church is a product of merges and unifications rather than schisms. So, institutional continuity is the first reason. Institutions are good. That doesn't mean institutions are everything, but institutions are good. And where they can be repaired, where they can be salvaged, where they can be protected, they ought to be. Now, I hear you saying, the Global Methodist Church split from the UMC, of course, and I would say they should not have done that. But didn't the Methodist Episcopal Church split from the Church of England? The answer to that is yes. Are they the same thing? No. The GMC split was illicit and schismatic. The Methodist Episcopal Church split was perfectly justified, I would argue, in a way that the GMC split wasn't. Now, that is not just special pleading. I want to see how quickly I can lay out this case. I'll give an overview, and maybe in a future video I'll go more in depth. But a couple differences. The Methodist Episcopal Church splits. The early Methodists are horribly persecuted. They are beaten. They are assaulted verbally and physically. They are having their houses broken into. People throwing bricks at through windows of their churches, attacking ministers. That is not something that the GMC ever faced. The new room in Bristol doesn't have any windows on the first floor. Why? Because otherwise, people would have been breaking the windows, throwing stuff through them. There's a rail between the congregation and the preacher so that people couldn't go up and attack the people who are preaching. That is not a concern in the case of the GMC. Second point, of course, is the state backing that the Church of England had against the Methodist churches. Because in the midst of all of this persecution, very often the law enforcement officers, in the way that they had it back then, didn't do anything about it. They often actually supported it. Magistrates and judges and police all allowed this to happen in many cases. And so you have this state backing, and then of course you have this relationship actually between the state and the church as a whole that is specifically condemned in the 1784 Book of Discipline. So really, the Methodist Church is built upon the institutional separation of church and state. Now, of course, there is some sense of separation of church and state, but there is actually a great deal of cross-influence. And we would argue that the influence really should only go one way. So there's that. Another point, of course, is that, and this is a very redeemed Zoomer talking point, but of course the GMC did win the vote that was the result that resulted in their disaffiliation. I cannot think of any army, for instance, that would retreat after winning the battle, but that is exactly what happened in 2019. The conservatives held the line and kept the language the same in the Book of Discipline, and then proceeded to leave because they foresaw that it was going to get hard. In contrast, there was no such vote. There were no votes to get Methodist doctrine to be popular or accepted in the Church of England. That was not a thing. These people were being killed and beaten and killed. The GMC had no such problem. So it is a very different situation, and I would say, of course, that the GMC schism was illicit, where the Methodist Episcopal Church split from the Church of England was justified. Now, that's my first reason, is institutional continuity. The second is the size, and therefore the financial power and the kingdom power, I'll say, of the United Methodist Church. The UMC is still the second largest Protestant church in the world. The biggest is actually the Southern Baptist Convention, interestingly enough. That is a pretty big church to leave to progressives. You know, that is a horrible thing to do. The bigger your church, the more kingdom power you have. That is to say, the bigger your church, the better equipped and able you are to enact and to spread the kingdom of God across the earth. So then the question is, what kind of kingdom do we want the United Methodist Church to be spreading? Because it's going to be spreading a kingdom either way. Do we want it to be spreading a kingdom of the Bible and Christ and true doctrine, or do we want it to be spreading a kingdom of evil? That is the question. And the answer to that question obviously should be, well, we want the first one. Well, how do you get the first one to happen? Well, you can start by not leaving. So another reason why we should indeed be putting resources into protecting the United Methodist Church and its doctrine is because of its size and its ability to fulfill the Great Commission and bring its influence to the world. You know, the smaller you are, the harder it is to do that. And while the GMC isn't in a place where it can't do any of that, it is certainly in a much weaker place than the United Methodist Church. Remember, only about maybe 3,000 to 4,000 churches disaffiliated. That is barely anything, okay? And not all of those even joined the GMC, for instance. And so something like that, a new institution with very little resources simply doesn't have the kingdom power that the United Methodist Church does. And that's not to say it never could, but why try to start from scratch? You know what I mean? Why when you have an institution, would you not seek to take it back, right? It has been taken. Right? And let's be honest, I would say that part of that is simply because the conservatives fought the wrong battle. And now, after 50 years of fighting the wrong battle, they left. They won the wrong battle, and then they retreated, but they were still fighting the wrong thing. Because the problem was never really legislation, but actually enforcement. That's neither here nor there. The third reason is that we are orthodox on paper. While there is a lot of problematic practice, our official doctrines are still robustly orthodox. All of our confessions are biblical and orthodox, very simply. And we should judge churches based on their official practice or official doctrine rather than their on-the-ground practice, because usually the on-the-ground practice is going to be a little more wonky than the actual official doctrine. And if we want to continue to have a United Methodist Church with official Orthodox doctrine, we should be going to it and not leaving it. Now, people will ask, what about homosexuality? Well, actually, the United Methodist Church does not officially mandate the ordination of gay clergy or of gay or the allowance of gay weddings or same-sex weddings in churches. It merely allows the local church to make that decision. So that would be, I would argue, still technically orthodox on paper, though unfortunately allowing unorthodox street-level practice. And that is something that must be reversed, obviously. But you're never going to do that unless you seek to strengthen the United Methodist Church, right? Because here's the thing. If conservatives strengthen the United Methodist Church, then it will be strengthened in a conservative direction. So we should be seeking that. And finally, I believe that despite its problems, the United Methodist Church is the most biblical church, by which I mean it is the most biblically oriented institution, and it has an ethos that is the closest of any church to the early church as described in Acts. The early church, and you get this from reading the Church Fathers as well. If I've learned anything from reading the Church Fathers, it's that diversity is the rule, not the exception. There is unity on very few things. And so I think that the United Methodist ethos of, in essentials, unity, in non-essentials, liberty, and in all things, charity, I believe that most properly captures the ethos of the early church. I also think our connectionalist polity, or what the early Methodists called a moderate episcopacy, is actually the most biblical. Is actually the most biblical church polity, and I might do a video in the future talking more about that and like how exactly our polity works and why it is the most biblical and its biblical basis and all that sort of stuff. But let it suffice that this is big picture, right? So I believe for those reasons, and of course our doctrines, being orthodox on paper, are all basic Bible Christian doctrines, right? The early Methodists resolved to be downright Bible Christians. And that is what the Methodists who formed our church desired to be. And so that is what the formation of our church was. And that is what we should continue to let it be, which will only happen if we actually go to the United Methodist Church. So what's my call here? My call is anyone who desires to be Methodist, in every case practicable, be United Methodist. Very simple. That doesn't necessarily mean go to the, pride flag waving, progressive heresy espousing United Methodist Church down the street, if that's all you have. But if you have anything that really isn't that, if you have anything to the right of that, you really should see what you can do, especially if it's conservative. If it's a conservative church, really, I don't think you have any excuse to not go to the United Methodist Church. If it's more moderate, but can be brought in a more conservative direction, you should go to that church. If it's like super problematic, pride waving, like I said, heresy, doesn't believe in justification by faith alone, doesn't believe in that Christ is God, doesn't believe in the Trinity, that sort of thing, then we can say, okay, well, you certainly shouldn't go there as your primary church. I'll allow it. Not that it matters what I'll allow, but that would be reasonable. But that doesn't even mean that that church is beyond salvation, to be quite frank with you. And so even if you don't go there as your primary spiritual community, that should be treated as a mission field. And so I would say if you desire to be Methodist, in every possible practical situation, you should go to a United Methodist Church. And where you have only UMCs that should be treated as mission fields, you should treat them as such and not abandon them. So that's all I really have on that. I hope that was coherent and not too all over the place. I thought it was reasonably coherent. I know I say that every time that, I hope that wasn't ridiculous, and I hope that made any sense. But I do these fairly off the cuff, so sometimes I don't, sometimes I worry that I'm not making any sense to anyone but me. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.